Our guest speaker tonight is Dr. Maria Lepowsky. She's the sister of Jean Lepowsky, who will introduce her now.
Okay, so our speaker tonight is a cultural anthropologist and someone I have known for a very long time. Our family moved to Los Angeles in the mid-1950s, and Maria was 4. I was not quite 2 years old. And as we were growing up, our parents took us all over Southern California, and one of our favorite places to visit was the Southwest Museum in Northeast Los Angeles. Anybody remember the Southwest Museum? Yeah, not that many, because you have to have lived there a long time ago to know it, but it was a fabulous building. It's on the top of a cliff, on the top of a hill, right at the edge of the hill, and in order to get in, you enter at the bottom of the hill, and you go through this long, well, it seemed, when I was little, it seemed very long to me. It's long and it's dark, but on each side, there were dioramas showing life among the native peoples, the indigenous native peoples of California. And it was just utterly fascinating, and I would go through those and stare at them and, imagine, being in those villages. It was just really fun. And so you go to the end of the long passage, and then you get in an elevator. It takes you up to the top of the hill and plops you out in the museum. Now, the museum is, or was at least at the time, home to the world's finest collection of Native American artifacts. And very educational. And one of the things I remember about my sister is that she was always fascinated with the Native Americans. And in fact, when she was about 12 years old, she used her allowance to buy a book about Native American people at the Southwest Museum. So she knew what she was interested in, and when she later went off to University of California, Berkeley, and studied anthropology, where she got her bachelor's and her PhD. She did her PhD research on an island in the South Seas right off of the main island of New Guinea, which is a really remarkable thing to my mind. Very, very adventurous person, my sister. Now she works at the University of Wisconsin. She has a joint appointment in anthropology and gender and women's studies. And she has been teaching a class about climate change and migration. And so she's going to be talking to you about that very subject. So here is my big sister, Maria.
So, okay, migration and climate change. These are two of the major issues of our time, but and with huge political, economic, and environmental ramifications. But it's kind of rare that people put the two of them together or put them into dialogue with each other when they really do need to be. They're very much connected. To be clear here, what we're talking about is anthropogenic climate change, meaning human-caused, human-generated climate change. Because there are other kinds of climate change. There are ice ages and so on. So what we're talking about is the period from almost exactly 1750 and the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution in Britain, and the burning of coal and the releasing of excess amounts of carbon. Then later with oil and commercial use of petroleum starting in 1879, right, in Pennsylvania, and also here in California, the process has accelerated. So other kinds of climate change then include, ice ages, oscillations, the Little Ice Age, which lasted till the early the 18th century, almost around the year 1800, concomitant changes in sea level, and so on. Climate denialists will say things like, oh, the climate's always changing. Right, we've heard that. Well, this is different. The causality is different. The scale is different. It's truly global. It includes the tropics, for example. It's a very compressed time frame, and there has been a rapid acceleration, which we are all currently living through. The climate crisis is here now. Forget the future. We are living in the future. And that's what I tell my students. We are the people of the future. We are living in the future. Now, most of the people in this room know what I'm talking about, having lived in the past. You know that we're already in the future. So let's talk then about who are migrants, who are transnational migrants to start out with. Okay, the stereotypes, right? Young single males, scary, right? Economic migrants, competing for citizens' jobs. These are stereotypes I'm talking about. The scholarly documentation shows us that half of all transnational migrants are women. There are a lot of children who migrate too. If you want to look it up, one person I recommend reading is the Canadian sociologist Saskia Sesson. They are people like this woman here who is a nanny, a caregiver in Toronto. And what she's holding up is actually a picture of her own children back in Manila graduating from high school. But she can't be there with them because she's taking care of other people's children. So she has exported her own emotional labor. She is a caregiver. And as many of you know firsthand here in Laguna Woods Village, many of our families are the beneficiaries of caregivers from other countries, right? Nannies, nursing home attendants, nurses, RNs, home health aides, and so on. That's a photograph, by the way, of the departures area at Manila International Airport in Philippines. Okay, and here, this is LACC, Los Angeles Community College. This is a graduation ceremony for their nursing and certified nursing assistant students. In recent times, let's see if I can make this change. Here we go. All right, so thinking about transnational migration, climate, and global politics, the most visible and large-scale examples are the ones I want to start with, because those are the ones that catch everybody's attention and cause something of a political frenzy, as you know. One is from the southern states of Mexico and from especially the northern parts of Central America, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, but also from sub-Saharan Africa and from the Middle East to Europe via the Mediterranean. And for reasons of time, I won't spend as much time on that. But there are the same kinds of converging drivers of migration that are concomitant factors, such as extremes of wealth inequality, landlessness, population pressure, and the presence of armed conflict. Okay, so increasing climatic variability then results in, as you know, things like drought, increasingly intense and unpredictable storms, changing seasons, floods, agricultural pests, crop failure. Now, all of this compounds social inequality and conflict. So it's really hard to separate out. So when people say, you know, I'm fleeing political violence and I'm scared for my life, you know, they mean it. But, you know, why is there so much violence in their home country? Why is there all this tension? These are the kinds of things that we need to think seriously about. This is a tough decision to leave your home and to risk crossing international borders into an uncertain future, you know, a highly militarized border such as the United States. And as my sister was just saying, risking, you know, getting detained, losing any rights of habeas corpus, no matter who you are, and getting sent to some private prison, God knows where, or down to El Salvador, right? You never know. That's a photograph of a so-called migrant caravan. It's in Chiapas, southern Mexico, but the people are Central Americans who have already crossed an international border or two into Mexico itself, but they're headed supposedly for the United States. Okay, so this particular image that I'm illustrating this slide with is an unfortunate farmer in Usulután, El Salvador, who has lost his corn crop, his maize crop, to drought. And so this is the kind of situation. There have been now long-standing droughts, terrible droughts in Guatemala and El Salvador, and northern Honduras in particular, and also in the southernmost parts of Mexico. Here's another image. This one is from El Salvador, and you see Ms. Gutierrez there is collecting water from a hole in the sand of a creek bed. You know, it's like, what if we had to do that over here at Aliso Creek, you know, to get our water? I mean, these are the kinds of things that precipitate people out of their homes. This is what, your children are hungry, your water supply has failed, your government has failed you, and so on. So, okay. So, climate change and crop failure then, drought, obviously, but also the change of the timing and the length of the growing seasons and a growing unpredictability, with El Nino oscillations, the Southern Ocean oscillation, weather variability and catastrophic storms, floods, drought followed by floods. We had a little bit of a taste of that here in SoCal recently. Crop failures due to agricultural pests is part of the package as well. And so one example here would be coffee rust. Anybody ever heard of coffee rust? Yeah, I mean, I'm a major coffee drinker myself. So coffee rust, there's a picture of it. My sister's a master gardener, so I knew she'd like the botanical slide. And there we go. But this is a sad one. This is coffee rust infecting. It's a fungal infection on the leaves and the cherries, the coffee cherries. Historically, it's kept in check by lower evening temperatures in places like the Guatemalan highlands and the Chiapas, southern Mexican highlands. Anybody ever had Guatemalan coffee? Yeah, you can get it over here at Pete's, right? Recommend it, highly recommend it. Is not cheap. However, as you would surmise, not very much of the cost of what you're buying is going to the farmers. But the temperatures no longer reliably drop down far enough at night to kill off the fungus and keep it in check. So here's a photograph. This particular photograph is from Chiapas, from Mexico, from the highlands. Have you ever had coffee from Chiapas? It's more rare here in this country, but it's premium stuff. I mean, they sell it for a huge price when it does get here. So this has been a growing artisanal specialty crop for smallholders, farmers in places like Guatemala and Chiapas, Mexico. It's an export crop, exporting to the United States, Canada, and Europe in particular. Often these are indigenous farmers, Mayans, of different groups of ethno-linguistic groups of Mayan people, and also mestizo farmers. This has become an alternative or a supplement to farming, to subsistence farming of maize, aka corn, as we call it in the U.S., or to taking your surplus production of maize to market, or your beans, because the price you can get is really terrible, and you need to feed your kids, you need to feed your elders, so people are growing coffee. But now the coffee crop is failing because of drought and because of the coffee rust. So what are you going to do? What are your options? This is one option. This is a Honduran migrant caravan in Chiapas in southern Mexico. According to a recent study by the United Nations World Food Program, nearly half of all Central American migrants that they were able to survey in places like this, they labeled them as food insecure. Okay. And thinking back to our immigrant friends, colleagues, and neighbors here in southern Orange County, the Philippines as well is tormented by aspects of climate change. That has led to rural to urban migration as people's fields flood out, also to transnational migration. One reason is the rise in so-called super typhoons, cyclonic storms, hurricanes, typhoons in East Asia. And this is a pretty recent photograph from just a few months back of flooded rice fields in the Philippines, on the island of Luzon, and where Manila is, and a call from a Catholic charity for international aid to people who are losing their livelihood, and you can see the rice fields are flooded. So people can be economic migrants and coming to better themselves and to send money back in remittances to their families, but they can also be pushed out by factors such as drought, flood, and crop failure. Oops, let's make that do it again. Okay, all right, let's talk then about migration and sea level rise. This is a major issue. Some of the first examples come from the Pacific Islands. This is a photograph of Tarawa in the Central Pacific in a country now known, an independent country now known as Kiribati, that's how you pronounce it. It used to be the Gilbert Islands, a British territory. So that's Kiribati. You'll notice it's the same word. So the problem is the land is sinking, the ocean is rising, the glaciers are melting at the poles. And here we are right by the equator, right on the equator. This is the country just south of Kiribati, which is called Tuvalu, which also used to be a British colony. And this is the atoll of Funafuti. I'll show you what an atoll is in just a minute. And this is the so-called king tides. I don't know if you've ever seen them. We were talking about Laguna just a little while ago. Have you ever seen the spring, the high tides of spring? Yeah, that's what we're talking about. So here they come up and over. The kids are having fun, but this can lead to a really serious, disastrous situation, which I'll talk about right now. Okay, so what is an atoll? An atoll is a ring of coral that has accreted on an undersea volcanic mount, an underwater mountain, in other words, rising up from the seafloor. So if you have a sea level rise, saltwater intrusion, either through high tides or through super cyclones, the saltwater intrusion kills your garden. It kills your taro tubers, your corms, your breadfruit, everything else you might be planting in order to be food sufficient. Right? It also swamps out the freshwater lens that is found on on most atolls. Some have such a saltwater intrusion that the water is not potable, and on those islands you do not find typically permanent settlement. People might go over there to fish or gather coconuts. The country of Tuvalu, Kiribati just to the north, just north of the equator, and the Marshall Islands, even farther to the north and nominally independent, but part of what's called a compact of free association with the United States, which controls its military and diplomatic and foreign relations. Those countries, or quasi-countries, they say a country, well, it's somewhere between a territory and a country, they have no high islands. There are no mountainous lands to go to. You would have to go to another country to get away if there has been saltwater intrusion and you've lost your garden and there's no drinking water. What people often do is they migrate to the capital, and then after that, maybe they'll migrate to, let's say if you're Marshallese, you might migrate to Honolulu, you might migrate to San Diego, you might migrate to Costa Mesa, right? Where there's a large Marshallese population. All right, this is what it looks like, right? This is Tuvalu. So notice, the seawater is over the road. If you look on the upper right, you can see the palms, the coconut palms are damaged because of the salt water. And if you see the lower left, that atoll is practically gone. But this is what they look like. They're like these long, skinny donuts of coral, and there's beautiful paradise beaches and so on. But you can't eat the beautiful sand. So the photograph on our left was actually taken in 2009, and that's school children drawing their fears about what is going to happen to their homelands. There's the boy that's being featured here he's drawn a great sea turtle, and it's carrying little tiny people and a coconut palm on its back, towards some kind of uncertain future. The population of Tuvalu very recently, just a couple of years ago, was over 11,000. Nearly 5,000 people moved away in 2023 alone. That's the most recent data I could find. Many of them to New Zealand and to Australia, where there are special visas for climate migrants. However, they'll only take in a few hundred people a year, something like 225 in Australia. It's just not going to cut it. The Marshallese come here to the U.S. or either to Hawaii or California usually, but the people from Tuvalu and the Kiribati, as they're called, the people from Kiribati, worry about the stigma of being called climate refugees. They feel shame at this, so that is an issue we want to be thinking about. All right, that is Tarawa Atoll. Are anybody familiar with the Battle of Tarawa, 1944, the Marines? I was actually there once for a very short time. But so we're looking kind of south-ish, and so the eastern shore there. See where the lagoon, the deep water is breaking on the coral reef there. That is where the Marines came ashore, and there was a tremendous loss of life during the Pacific War. So that is the capital. So if you're in one of the outer islands, as they call them, of Kiribati, the first thing you would do if your gardens fail or your salt water, you can't get drinking water because there's been saltwater intrusion, is to move to the capital and try to enter the wage economy. But you can see how crowded it is. I mean, it's incredibly dense population. Here's an outer atoll, Abiang it's called, and this poor man has decided, this particular photograph comes from a really good New York Times story from a few years back. This man, who's already 70 years old, has decided not to try to replant his crops after they were inundated. He's given up. He's given up. So other people are going to have to supply him with food. It's likely that the food is going to be imported by boat. It's going to consist of things like rice from the Sacramento Valley of California, tinned mackerel probably caught illegally off Pacific shores and canned in Taiwan and then sold back and so on. So, that's what it turns out to be, mostly a lot of tinned fish and rice. So not as healthy as the traditional sovereign diet. Now, a former government of Kiribati in 2014 purchased land on one of the high islands of Fiji, which is an independent nation and was also a former British colony. Now, that government in more recent years got voted out in favor of a more right, conservative, so-called business-friendly government. So I'm politely putting it as current debates about whether to migrate together, everybody, managed migration, or versus staying and building seawalls, coastal defenses, and making a living by selling copra, which is dried coconut meat. Well, one problem with working backwards with selling copra is that the coconuts are being affected by sea level rise. I already showed you some photographs of that. This is a problem with the seawall thing, is it doesn't work. It might work for 1 storm, 2 storms, 3 storms, and then down it goes. So notice the rebar there in the reef and the kid playing? This is South Tarawa, and that's a failed seawall. So, and there's a wrecked ship resting behind him too. Okay, this is the land they bought on Vanuatu, Fiji. 6,000 acres, beautiful. And the former president who made impassioned speeches about this at United Nations and at some of the climate summits calls it migration with dignity. And the idea is it'll be there if we need it. But one problem is that there was a change of government in Kiribati, so they haven't moved, and they're talking about whether they should or not. Nobody wants to leave their homeland unless they have to, usually. Especially the middle-aged and older people. They don't want to go. But here in Fiji, too, the coastal villages are in the last years especially, people are worried about sea level rise there, too, and talking about managed retreat inland. So the Fiji government is trying to locate some villages inland, and the people keep saying, no, we're saltwater people, we don't want to go inland. Even half a mile inland. We're fishing people, we don't want to do it. But anyway, that is their land there, that is their option. Okay, all right, how about sea level rise and migration in the United States? Who's affected? Well, have you ever heard the phrase sunny day flooding? Anybody ever been to Florida and heard that phrase? Sunny day flooding. What it means is there goes the Atlantic up onto your streets. I'll talk about that, but let me talk about a couple of places that are even more dramatically affected, but are very much less well known. One is called Shishmaref, Alaska, and the other is Ile de Jean-Charles in southern Louisiana. They are both indigenous communities. This is Shishmaref. Notice those are houses falling into the ocean. It's a barrier island on the Bering Sea. The island is called Sarachif, the village is called Shishmaref. The people are Inupiat. The island is, these days it's 3 miles long and about a quarter mile wide. It used to be a bunch wider, but chunks of it keep falling into the sea. The people voted twice for managed retreat inland, 2012 and 2016, actually. And there were a whole spate of news stories. America's first climate refugees, except that they haven't moved. Now, why haven't they moved inland? They say, well, we're fishing people. Why should we? I mean, this is our territory, yeah, but it's boggy. The permafrost is melting because of climate change. So you can't run your snow machine over it. Everything gets bogged down. The mosquitoes are like clouds from hell. And, there's not enough funding. There was some federal funding, but, good luck with that these days, right? So there we are. Okay, here's another example of so-called America's first climate refugees. Now, in this case, there has been mostly a managed retreat from Ile de Jean Charles. Now, these people, they call themselves the Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw Nation. There's a long story behind it, why that name. It's like the people who call themselves Chitimacha and the people who call themselves Choctaw are federally recognized, and they become cranky when the people from this particular island want to use those names. But they are, in fact, entitled to it genealogically and culturally. So the retreat is to Houma, a city in South Louisiana on the mainland, which is a fishing community. It's a very nice town. It's only about 15 feet high, so it's got problems too. But some people have refused to go. Things have dragged out so long that some of the elders have passed away. Here are a couple of historic photos. You can see the charming children with the wooden pirogue, as they're called down there. You can see a couple of chiefs, and you can see what people call the road. And I've actually been on that road. That is Ile de Jean Charles there in the distance, that smudge on the horizon. And I can tell you that road is really scary to drive on. The time that my partner and I were driving on it, he was doing some research with and advocating for sovereignty for the Ile de Jean Charles people, which is why we were there. But the Gulf of Mexico was coming up over the road, sloshing over the road. I'm like, yeah, we're in the Gulf. This is too scary. But we made it. But sometimes they get cut off. They can't leave except by boat. The state of Louisiana is no longer maintaining the road, and most of the island, over 90% of the island, is gone. So here are people who do deserve the title of America's first climate refugees in the sense of a managed retreat of a group of people rather than just individuals. Okay, Miami Beach, sunny day flooding, there it is. You wake up one beautiful morning, another beautiful day in paradise, right? Except no, there's your ride. Not a good morning after all. Okay, here's some more images from Miami proper. That was Miami Beach before. This has been documented in Miami since at least 2010. But of course it is worsening due to the acceleration of sea level rise along the East Coast, which is coupled by the subsidence of land along the East Coast. We have to deal with sea level rise here in the Pacific Rim, but our land is not subsiding to the same degree. We have cliffs eroding into the sea, like down by Del Mar. The surf liner needs to be rerouted, because the tracks are washing away. Pacifica, south of San Francisco, keeps falling into the ocean, right? Big Sur, Highway 1's been closed now for, how long has it been this time? Over a year? About a year this time, and it keeps getting washed away by landslides, by catastrophic El Nino storms. That looks like, freshwater flood. It's not. That's the ocean. That's the Atlantic Ocean that city bus is driving through. Okay, so what this means also is the current crisis in places like Florida of getting insurance for your house. So this has an impact on interstate migration, okay? So that would be decisions on where to retire by retirees. Congratulations, you made a better choice. It's not perfect, but hey, you really made a better choice. Hurricanes are increasing in intensity, whether it's frequency or not, that's debatable, but certainly in intensity, in wind velocity, in rapid acceleration, going from a Cat 1 to a Cat 4 in just a matter of hours. We saw that as recently as last August and September in South Florida. Widespread flooding, inland flooding, going sometimes as much as 100 miles inland, and the Florida peninsula is pretty narrow. right? So there aren't a whole lot of safe places. And again, sea level rise. So the storm surge is on top of the risen sea level. Here are some images from Category 4 storm Hurricane Ian. I was just reading that in South Florida, this is Fort Myers and Fort Myers Beach, that they still have not recovered from Ian, and they're saying, well, hey, what about us? I mean, you're all talking about Hurricane Helene and so on, but what about us? We never got back to where we were. Where's FEMA when you need it? Where's the federal government when you need it? Right? Okay, so in other words, climate change and climate risk have already affected internal migration here in the United States, interstate migration in particular. And again, that's Fort Myers Beach. And that brings me to that question of like, where do we go if we want to retire? And the fallacy of the climate haven, right? It's like, we'll go somewhere where, it's not falling into the ocean, or they don't have any hurricanes. I mean, these are good ideas, right? And one place, and it used to be, not anymore, but it used to be described as a climate haven, a place that was protected from climate change, Asheville, North Carolina, in western North Carolina. And there are people who moved from California to get away from wildfires, for example, and find a better retirement in Asheville, North Carolina. And then look at that, that's Hurricane Helene, right? All the way inland, some 800 miles away, way up in the Appalachian Mountains of Asheville. And they still have not yet recovered. And that takes us to wildfire risk and the fallacy of the climate haven. People used to say, they don't so much anymore, oh, well, in the Pacific Northwest, we have lots of water and it doesn't get all that hot. And what has happened because of climate change is the acceleration and exacerbation of catastrophic wildfires, which nobody in this room needs to be told about, given the catastrophe that Los Angeles area just lived through just a few months ago. And so even if your particular home is not on fire, it's full of smoke, right? And smoke taint. Your crops are tainted by, you can't sell your wine grapes because they're tainted by smoke. You can't breathe the air in some place like Portland when there are wildfires in the mountains, I can tell you personally. So, you're in a fix. Also, Portland had 120 degrees in 2002. So I mean, like, what happened to our climate haven, right? And 114, it gets to 114 here. Now, Jean and my parents moved here to Leisure World, as it then was, in 1982. And they were kind of taken aback. We were in Los Angeles, and they were kind of taken aback. It was pretty hot in the summer, hotter than they were used to, in this particular microclimate that's, cut off from the sea breezes, right? But they did without air conditioning for years. But then that became medically dangerous, and so we put in air conditioning. But we grew up without air conditioning in Los Angeles, and people just put up with there were some 100-some degree days, but it didn't last that long, and it was the famous "it's a dry heat," right? But things have changed. Things have changed. That is Paradise, California, whose name implies that it used to be considered a great place to retire to, and it burned to the ground a few years ago, as you can see. All right. Well, Palm Springs, there's a great place to retire to, right? Well, in 2024, Palm Springs had 83 days above 110 Fahrenheit and 6 days above 120 Fahrenheit, okay? So this is changing people's behavior. This is changing people's economic behavior, even beyond the current administration and its how shall we say, immigration policies and tariff policies. Palm Springs is no longer seeming so wonderful. I have a good friend who has some high school friends who retired to Palm Springs, and they couldn't put up with this 120-degree heat. And they said, we're out of here. We're moving to someplace where we'll be safe from climate change. And they moved to Asheville, North Carolina. Yep, they did. They were okay, but they were trapped in their house for days. Their water was cut off. All they had to drink was wine. But so they had an interesting time of it. Okay, so what can we learn from some of these early examples of climate risk in the United States? Well, one question that comes up right away, and you can read it, in the LA Times this week, for example, is people seeking to rebuild along the coast after the Palisades fire. The county and the cities are all saying, well, no, we're not going to change anything. You go rebuild. You're traumatized enough. Go rebuild. That's the Malibu fire. If people change their minds, that's going to be another matter. At this point, we want to think about the role of insurance companies and how they shape state policies, land use policies, county level policies, municipalities, and also individual decisions. Because if you can't get insurance to rebuild there in Malibu, are you going to build? Your only option is, anybody know what the California Fair Plan is? Yeah, it's the insurance of last resort here in California. You can get it, but it's extremely expensive and your coverage is just minimal. So it's better than going without insurance, but not by much. So that is going to be a factor, because insurance companies don't care about the politics of it in terms of risk assessment, right? Casualty and writing policy. That's why State Farm is not writing any more new home insurance policies here in this whole state, because they are aware of the increasing risk to the housing supply of climate risk, climate change. So, here we go. So who is affected by all of this? Pretty much everybody. The working poor, the middle class, the affluent, retirees, certainly. The impact is on everybody's property values, and therefore on state tax revenues. As we know, there's an insurance crisis here in California. There's a huge insurance crisis, even worse, in the state of Florida, where they have their equivalent of the FAIR Plan. So where do we go from here? I guess, this is the time where we get to talk about it. Well, decarbonizing the economy. And this is going to continue to take what you are already doing, which is political action. We need to hire better politicians. That's our job here, right? So political action, education, both formal and informal. And climate education is already a recognized specialty. And I know, for example, at my university, University of Wisconsin-Madison, the School of Education, there are people who are climate educators, and I'm thrilled to say that one of my students, grad students last semester, in the course I taught on the anthropology of climate change, was elected to the state assembly. Yeah, he's 24 years old, on a policy of climate education and standing up for the rights of working people. So, this is a thing, it's a coming thing, and a lot of the leadership on climate action is coming, as you know, from young people. So that's another thing that everybody here can do, is get behind the people who are standing up for the rights of young people and future generations. We're also going to need a humane immigration policy, because as you can see, the pressures to immigrate to places such as the United States or Europe, they're not going away. They're only going to get worse. So we all have to face it. We all have to find a humane way forward. And then we can talk about details, major details, such as a managed retreat, as if and when we need it, from parts of the coast and from fire zones and flood zones. So, but the main thing here I leave you with is continue with political action. So thank you all for listening. Thank you.
Just got handed, okay, here's the rule. What role do you think technology will play in mitigating the effects of climate change?
Yeah, that's an important question. And we're kind of in this weird techno-utopian, dystopian, multivalent era, Some of our new overlords say, oh, well, we'll solve the problem, through technology. Well, that is going to require an investment of federal and private funds to a great degree for new energy sources, new clean energy sources, for subsidizing things like electric vehicles and whatever comes next. Obviously, everybody in this room is aware we are currently moving backwards at a rapid pace. On the other hand, there are already some economies of scale, for example, solar power and wind power, and they're not going away because they're good for business. People can make money off of that, which is one reason why the Biden era infrastructure bill, supporting solar and wind power. Even in Republican districts, the politicians are saying, "Whoa, wait! Not in my district because those are good jobs there. They're popular and they're kind of backing away from it." So I would say I have some cautious optimism about this, but the problem is where you start believing people who say, "Oh well, we'll solve this in the future." That is not the way forward.
Okay, one more question, because we're running out of time. So you mentioned political will, of which we know there is none. At the federal level, at the states, when the states are trying to do something like pass the Superfund to penalize polluters, Trump says he's gonna threaten to do something bad to the states. What about the municipalities? So San Francisco and Berkeley a long time ago got rid of single-use plastic.
Right.
How much effect does that have, and are you seeing other examples where we can do something?
Yeah, this is a great question. I mean, it's kind of the neoliberal approach of everybody's responsibility. We'll pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and solve the climate crisis. But, incrementally, if we all do conserve and, try to, if we can afford it, move over to electric vehicles or walking or electric bikes or electric golf carts, then taking lots of electric buses, then it does add up. It does add up. I was just looking at some news stories about Paris and how the mayor there, Anne Hidalgo, who's a socialist, has been in office since I think 2014. And Paris used to have a horrific smog problem. It does not anymore. And they are making bicycle boulevards, against a lot of objection, but they're doing it. Bicycle boulevards and anti-commuter barriers and pedestrian walkways along the Seine and so on. And the air is dramatically cleaner in just 10 years. So now that's a world city, but it is at the municipal level. Another thing that people can do at the municipal or regional level is school boards, right? Because I think of my former student, now state representative, the climate educator. Young people need science education. Young people need climate education, and they're not going to get it with hostile school board members. The science teachers are ready, and people like my former student are ready to teach the teachers. That's exactly what he's working on. He has lesson plans and so on at different grade levels. So that's the kind of thing that you might not immediately think, well, school board, what's that got to do with climate crisis? Well, it does, because that's where young people are getting their knowledge and their tools to move forward.
I have a question over here.
Hi, great talk, great
Thank
slides, great presentation, thank you. Question, about 60 years ago, a leading law review article was published called "Do Trees Have Standing?" And it led to passing of laws and rules of court that allowed, obviously the trees don't actually come into the courtroom, but people do, asserting the interests of the environment.
Yes.
What would you think of a new global offense, call it ecocide or geocide, which would define, well, as defined, would be an offense against the earth and a reasonable climate? Obviously no jail for offenders, probably no fines, but publicity. international treaty lead to public opinion, perhaps boycotts and other publicity for those who knowingly screw up the environment?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Yeah, it's actually, this is part of the anthropology part of climate change also, is who or what is a person? And the personhood of other than human persons is what it's called. The places that this is most advanced are countries such as Aotearoa, New Zealand, which is how they prefer to call it. The Maori name is Aotearoa, so Aotearoa, New Zealand, compound name, where the Wanganui River, for example, is, according to the Supreme Court, a person. And it has rights. And it has environmental rights not to be violated. And so that's a civil case, not a criminal case. Right, so that is national law, and in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Similarly, in Bolivia, they have, and in Ecuador, there have been court cases, state Supreme Court cases that have granted personhood and therefore a court standing to mountain peaks to fight against mining and logging, depredations of, in this case, multinational corporations. You won't be surprised to hear. So this is actually a growing movement in environmental circles, and it's something that my colleagues in anthropology, among others, are writing about. So I do think that is one of the frontiers, it's the Dr. Seuss question, right? Who speaks for the trees, right? And that would be us. So.
Hi, this is more of a statement than it is a question. I just want to say thank you to the Democratic Club for bringing this intelligent, interesting, and thought-provoking speaker instead of a J6 convict.
Very good. Thank you so much. One last.
I would just like to make a statement as well. All of us can do better to challenge carbon. Get a golf cart, learn how to use the bus. We have taxis here. And we can all do a small part to reduce carbon in our community. And as you were saying, just a little bit makes a big change.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. And we're modeling behavior for other people around us too. So it's a critical mass thing, just like demonstrating.
Thank you so much, Maria. That was great. Thank you, everyone. And yes, to that point, think about every time you protest, you join a rally, make a phone call to an elected, write a postcard, write a letter. It makes a difference. Maybe they hear you, but someday maybe they'll listen to you. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Have a great night.